السلام عليكم.
Right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, as we promised you, you have asked me many times about the narrations, right? Different riwayat of the Quran, and I give you like overview about it. And when you guys asked me many times, I decided to do as Ashab al-Salaf. They said, خذوا العلم من أهلي. I think is Hafiz ibn Hajar, if I'm not mistaken. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar. خذ العلم من أهلي. Take the knowledge from its people. Take the knowledge from its people. And I can witness from the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Sheikh Hammad, he is the Ahlul Ilm. He is the, he's the people of this knowledge. So may Allah make it in his reward, make Allah reward him for this. And Jazallah khairan for his effort and dedicating this time for us. So all yours, today I'm your student, inshallah. Jazallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So Sheikh Muhammad, he asked me to go over the qira'at, riwayat, this sort of topic. To be honest, it's quite an impossible task to explain everything in an hour, but we will try to give as much information as we can, right? So the first thing that I want to go over would be how the Quran was passed down. That's the most important part. So one important thing about our religion is that it's passed from person to person. It's an oral tradition, right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is receiving the wahi from Jibreel, who's bringing it from Rasulullah, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Quran is coming down, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is teaching the Sahaba the Quran, right? So the Quran does not come down all at one time in one book. It's coming down bit by bit, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching the Sahaba, this ayah goes here in this surah before this ayah, and he's teaching them where to place these ayat. So by the end of his life, the entire Quran comes down, and there is still not yet a complete written version of the Quran in one mushaf. The entire Quran has been written down. An important thing to remember is a lot of times you hear people say, oh, this thing was only written down so many years after the Prophet, so we cannot accept it. This is a completely false statement. It's a fallacy. Even if you look at, for example, Egyptian history, anything before, the 2nd, 3rd century, everything was oral, and it's the most proper way of preserving information as well. It comes in Ibn Majah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is explaining how the Quran has been protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he explains it's kitabun la yaghsiluhu al-ma. It's a book that water cannot wash it. If you take a book and you rinse it with water, the ink comes off. The Quran is not one of those things. Why? Because it's written in our hearts. So the oral tradition was there. So the Sahaba took the entire Quran from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and memorized it. During the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, there was a plea, a need, that there was many of the Qurra, the Hufad of the Quran, were dying in battle. So they requested Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, maybe we should make a jama', at least one complete copy of the Quran. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he tasked Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu with this jama', this compilation. So the first jama' was done during the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. This one mushaf, each Sahaba brought whatever he had. So he had written 2-3 juz that he had heard directly from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. During the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was the writing of the Quran. It just wasn't written in one book, right? Some people say that the Quran was not written down during this time, it was only heard. nothing wrong with that, but that's not even the case. It was also written down. During the time of Uthman radiallahu anh, right? So this is when things start getting more standardized. Uthman radiallahu anh, there was the Battle of Azerbaijan. And these are heavy battles. You know, we're fighting the Byzantine Empire, the Sassanid dynasty, and there's many Sahaba who are dying. There's also many people accepting Islam. And these people who are accepting Islam, these people are not Arab. So when they're not Arab, they cannot grasp the Quran the way Sheikh Muhammad grasped the Quran, right? You don't understand the language. So when there's these people coming into Islam, there starts being misunderstandings, and it's difficult for them to grasp the Quran. So Uthman radiallahu anhu, what he does is he orders for a standardization of the Quran. Okay, so in order to understand why was there misunderstandings, there is a science of the Quran which is called qira'at. If you don't mind, I'm going to write these terms in Arabic. I'll say them out loud, but it's just, they're Arabic terms, so I'm going to write them in Arabic. So there's a famous hadith by Abdullah bin Mas'ud, which is أنزل القرآن على 7 أحرف فقرأوا ما سيسر منه. Okay, أنزل القرآن على 7 أحرف فقرأوا ما تيسر منه. This hadith, many scholars say this is mutawatir, and there's many ahadith like this. So what the hadith means is that Quran was revealed upon 7 ahruf. So read from whichever of them is easy for you. So when the Quran was coming down, remember we talked about this, the Sahaba are taking it orally from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were not only from one tribe. They did not all speak the same dialect. You had Sahaba from Quraysh, you had Sahaba from Tamim, Banu Tamim, you had Banu Hudayb, you had Banu Qais, you had Banu Thaqif, Banu Hawazin, Banu Sa'ad. You had all these different tribes, right? Banu Asad. So they all have different lahjat, different kind of ways of saying things. It's quite easy to understand as we here speak American English. I'm speaking in American English, right? My English is actually not completely American because I spent a lot of time in South Africa and I got influenced by South African English, right? I had many of my best friends and even my roommates were from London. So I got influenced by Oxford English, London English, right? And then even within the United States, you're gonna have the Southeastern English, you're gonna have the Northerner accent, the California accent, right? The Hawaiian accent. So it's very easy to understand just from English. Australians, they speak slightly different. People, it's a natural phenomenon of linguistics that people tend to differ in their speech, right? So the same thing with the Arabs. The Arabs all spoke Arabic, but their Arabic was influenced by, it could be trades with Syria, with the Sassanid dynasty, with the Byzantines. It could be trading with those in the East, or it could just be, over time things change, right? So they spoke different dialects, which made it difficult for them all to understand a Quran in a specific dialect. Some of the ahadith mention that the Quran, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, amongst them were old men who are, at a certain age, you're not willing to accept change, right? The way you speak is quite grounded. You have people who are uneducated. Remember, most of the Arabs were not literate. So because of the demographic, the types of Sahaba that were there, it doesn't make sense for all the Sahaba to gather upon one Qurayshi dialect. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it comes in this hadith that he was speaking to Jibreel alayhi salam, and he's telling him, this is too difficult for my ummah. So then it was allowed up to 7 ahruf. Okay? So, what are these ahruf? This is a word. Ahruf, it doesn't mean dialects. It can have different meanings. What the meaning of this hadith is that the Quran was revealed upon. I'll write this. أنزل على طريقة روعي فيها الفوارق القائمة It's always coming downwards, but it's okay. أنزل على طريقة روعي فيها الفوارق القائمة بين لغات القبائل السبع. Right? So the Quran comes down upon 7 ahruf, meaning it's encompassing of the differences found within 7 major dialects of Arabic. Okay? So, what are these dialects or these tribes? So the thing is, remember, understanding what tribe the Arabic of the Quran is based on, it doesn't really make too much of a difference, because at the end of the day, even if I knew that one of the 7 dialects is the dialect of Banu Asad, for example, it doesn't mean I can study the dialect of Banu Asad and then start reading the Quran according to what I've learned about Banu Asad. No, remember, the sunnah of the Quran is that it's taken from your teacher, who learned from his teacher, who learned from his teacher, until you get to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So every single dialect that comes, every single difference you find in the riwayat, all of these go back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, that is the most important thing. Okay, every single dialect, every single difference found in the Quran, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam explicitly taught the Sahaba, you can read it like this too. Okay, he taught him you could read it like this. So for example, you have a Sahabi. So I'll start bringing in some examples of differences in the qira'at, right? And then from that, then we'll go into the riwayat as well. So this is a very simple one, which is the word that comes غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ, right? So عَلَيْهِمْ. Now, there may be certain dialects that do not necessarily say alayhim. Rather, they say alayhum. It's the same thing, written the same way. It's just the pronunciation, right? Same way, like the word I just said. What's the difference between pronunciation and pronunciation? It's just the way I say it, right? I could also say alayhimu. I could also say alayhumu, right? And it keeps on going on, right? There's many ways I can say this. So the different dialects, they had different ways of saying certain words. And you cannot force somebody who his entire life has been saying alayhum that now you have to know it's alayhim. Right? Remember, these are the original undertakers of the Quran. It's not like us who learn the Quran from like as a new language. No, right? Because obviously, if it's a new language, you learn alayhim. Okay, it's alayhim, right? But these people, you cannot change their ways. So the Quran was brought upon these sab'at al-ahruf. Okay? So it's quite, like I explained, it's quite easy to understand these ones. And then we'll go into more kind of confusing ones as well. Okay, so going back to my story. So after the Battle of Azerbaijan, there was many Sahaba, many new Muslims, right? Now these new Muslims are hearing, for example, alayhim, alayhum, alayhimu, alayhumu, right? They're hearing yahsabuna, yahsibuna, and you know, sirata, sirata, zirata. They're hearing all these different things. It's quite confusing, right? Especially when you go into the other, for example, وَتَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالْعِهْنِ. What does عِهْن mean? عِهْن is a cotton, yeah? Another قراءة وَتَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالصُّوفِ means the same thing, right? It's a different qira'ah. Now these people are coming, they don't understand. It was very clear to the Arabs because ayn is a synonym of suf. So I can read it this way, I can read it that way, right? But to the new Muslims coming, they don't even know Arabic. Now they are wondering why can it be kal-ayn and kasuf? So what Uthman radiallahu anhu does, he does we call it the Rasm Uthmani, that he calls Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu, and he makes this commandment that I want you to make a standardized Quran, right? I'm in a quite summarized version of the story. And so Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu, he is one of the greatest qurra of the Sahaba. If not, you could say the greatest. So he was also the one who did the Jama' for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Right? So now, remember, Zayd bin Thabit is not writing the Quran from his memory. No, what he does is, he has a system where all the Sahaba are called who have, for example, for the Jama' of Abu Bakr, every Sahabi that has something written down, it is brought to him, and he needs two witnesses with him. That these two witnesses, they bear witness that this was written in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And then he accepts it, and then he adds it to the Jama', right? And this very meticulous way of Jama' was the Jama' during the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Now this mushaf was passed down to Umar radiallahu anhu, and then it was passed down to Hafsa, the daughter of Umar radiallahu anhu, right? Hafsa radiallahu anha, right? And now, so Uthman radiallahu anhu, he sends a message to Hafsa radiallahu anha to hand over the mushaf. So the mushaf now comes in the hands of Uthman. Now Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu comes, and then he has a council of Sahaba around him. And the same thing, all the Sahaba must come, and they are compiling the Quran, not compiling this time, writing the Quran from beginning to end, using this mushaf that all the writings inside are from directly it's inspected by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they are writing now. So you have things like this, كالعهن كالصوف. So the order of Uthman radiallahu anhu was that now that there's so many Muslims coming in, we cannot, while it made complete sense when it was mainly Arabs, now it's not making so much sense to have this much ikhtiyar. Remember, the whole reason for this, remember what I mentioned before. I'm going to put it up here so that we don't forget. The reason for the 7 ahruf was what? Somebody asked me to do the dars in Arabic, so tawsi'a, tarkhis, right? To make it easy and to give you more options, to make it easy for the Muslims, right? So that they're not forced to go and understand the Arabic of a different dialect, right? When it can be conformed to their own dialect as well, right? Or you also have like al-ushub. What's ushub? Grass, right? I can also say kala. Same thing, right? So these are synonyms, right? So now the order to Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu an by Uthman radiallahu an was when there is a difference in the lughat, right? So one Sahabi is saying, suf, one is saying ayn, right? They're both correct, right? These are both mutawatir, 100% correct. But he says the final verdict will be which one was the dialect of Quraysh, right? So now from these two, this one was the dialect of Quraysh. So in the Mus'haf of Uthman radiallahu anh, the one that he's having written down, Urhun was the one that was written. Okay? So this is the multiple masahif were written down. Okay? So now Uthman radiallahu anh, in this he has several masahif written down, and again he is the Khalifa, right? So he makes the commandment to his subjects, right? To all the Muslims living under his rule, that any mushaf that does not conform with this mushaf is invalidated. Okay? And also you have, like, for example, Hajjaj bin Yusuf, he was also very, very staunch upon this, right? He used to, shred up the masahif that didn't conform with the masahif of Uthman. So you ended up having only one mushaf, which is the, we say, masahif Uthmaniyya. Okay, the masahif Uthmaniyya. So from these masahif, you had, for example, you had one sent to Medina Munawwara. You had one sent to Kufa. Remember, Umar radiallahu anh, he conquered Kufa, right? Going up, conquered the conquering parts of the Byzantine Empire. So you're getting all this land up north. So you have Kufa. And you have one sent to Basra, right? So we're going to talk about Kufa probably a lot more. You have one sent to Mecca. You have one sent to Yemen. Ibn Jazri mentions there's one sent to Bahrain. And there's one mushaf that Uthman radiallahu anh keeps for himself. We'll just say Imam. Imam Uthman radiallahu anh, he keeps one, we call this the Mushaf al-Imam. Okay? Now, so when Uthman radiallahu anh is sending these masahif to these different major cities, right? The standardized version of the Quran, right? So as you can see, many of the qira'at are going to be, the entire qira'at are not lost, right? Many parts of the qira'at may be now lost, right? Because again, the qira'at that says kasuf, or the qira'at that has something extra, for example, أيام متتابعات. So متتابعات was not written, right? So some of these things are going to be lost, right? So we'll see that maybe if we talk about it, the qira'at of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Now with each mushaf that is sent, there is also a highly qualified teacher sent with each mushaf. Okay, so we're going to talk. Now we're going to get into the riwayat. Okay, so with each mushaf you're having a qualified teacher sent with the mushaf to become the qari of the city. Okay, so just like, let's say Georgia, who was the first person to begin Quran classes in Georgia? Started a hifz program. It was Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar at Georgia Islamic Institute. Very first person to open up a hifz, right? And you can see so many students in Georgia are all connecting back to him. So he was kind of like the qari, right? He is a qari. He was the qari of Georgia. Now, alhamdulillah, we're blessed with many, many scholars. Okay, so now let's begin talking about riwayat. I guess at this point, does anyone have any questions?
So these 7 books that they have sent to, we have Kitab al-Imam, Kitab al-Bahrain, Medina, Kufa, Basra, Mecca, Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
Each one is one harf, one narration, right?
No.
The 7 are different or the same?
They are
the same.
Almost the same,
Okay.
right? There might be slight differences. For example, one mushaf may say wassa, one mushaf may say awsa, right? But they are pretty much the same. Okay? So there's many different things we could talk about the ahruf, the qaba'il. I guess maybe before we head on, if anyone is interested in which qaba'il, I already explained, there's not really much benefit to knowing which qaba'il is meant, but if you did want to know, so we have Quraysh, we have Hudayl, we have Asad, we have Banu Tamim, we have Banu Qais, we have Banu Dabba, Quraysh, Hudayl, Asad, Tamim, Qais, yeah, of course, Banu Kinan. So these 7 could be meant, right? Rasulullah never told us which exact lughat they were, but we do know that, like, looking at the riwayat, checking seeing the ahadith, you can see, like, Quraysh for sure, right? Obviously Rasulullah himself spoke the lughat of Quraysh, right? And like we talked about in the Jama, the Masahif Uthmaniyya, it was written according to the lughat of Quraysh, right? And obviously the first Sahaba were Quraysh, right? So obviously it has to be in their lugha, right? Banu Hudayl, Banu Asad, Banu Tamim, right? If you study the seerah, right, you will see all of these different tribes interacting and becoming Muslim and stuff. So you can definitely see these are like very major tribes, right? From Qais, you have, like, for example, the Hawazin, you have like Thaqif, Banu Thaqif, you have Banu Sa'ad, right? From like Hudayl, right? You have, for example, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. He used to, prefer most of the dialect of Hudayl. Okay, so. But like I said, even if I studied the whole dialect of Kinana, it doesn't mean I can start reciting the Quran according to it. Because again, the number one important part, and you will if you study deeper qira'at, you will see, like, there's like 3 conditions to accept the qira'ah. The main condition is you need to trace it back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Main tradition, right? We have other shara'it as well. For example, being in coherence with the Masahif Uthmaniyya, being in coherence with the rules of Nahwa. Okay, so we have the expansion of the Islamic Empire. Muslims are heading out, and they are, they don't all just stay in Mecca and stay in Medina. They travel outwards. So you have Muslims all around the world, okay? And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the people who learned the Quran directly from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they are also spread out, right? So this is now we're going to talk about the riwayat, okay? Now, more than the Sahaba were who? The Tabi'een, right? And the Tabi'een, they take from the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, right? So I don't think I'm going to actually write this, but I'll just give you a list of, for example, some of the major Qurra from the Tabi'een in each city, right? So let's say, for example, you have Medina Munawwara, you have Sa'id bin Musayyib, right? And if you studied Hadith, a lot of these names will be very familiar, right? You have Sa'id bin Musayyib, you have Urwa, right? You have Salim. Salim was the student of Abdullah bin Umar. You have Umar bin Abdul Aziz, you have Sulaiman, you have Atta, Sulaiman bin Yasar, Atta bin Yasar, two brothers. You have Abdurrahman bin Hurmuz al-A'raj, one of the greatest Qurra from the Tabi'in. You have Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, one of the greatest Muhaddithin, right? Now you have in Makkah, you have Ubayd bin Umair, Atta, Tawus, Mujahid, Ikrimah, right? Mujahid and Ikrimah, both major students of Abdullah bin Abbas, right? Ibn Abi Mulaika. From Kufa, you have Alqama, Aswad, Masruq, Ubaidah, right? These names, if you studied, for example, Hanafi fiqh, these names will be extremely familiar. You have Amr bin Sharahbil, Harith bin Qais, Amr bin Maymun, Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, we're going to talk about him a lot. Zir bin Hubaysh, we're going to talk about him as well. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, right? Basra, you have Amr bin Abdul Qais, Abu al-Aliya, Abu Raja, Nasr bin Asim, Yahya bin Ya'mar, Mu'adh, Jabir bin Zayd, Hassan al-Basri. No, Hassan al-Basri, our student here. He was there at that time. Ibn Sirin and Qatada, right? Students of Anas radiallahu anhu. Okay? Sham, right? And you can also, if you have knowledge of, this is called the Ilm al-Rijal, understanding where these people were. So you would remember, like, oh yeah, Anas radiallahu anhu, his base was in Basra, right? Abdullah bin Mas'ud, his base was in Kufa, right? And so on and so forth. You will see their students and the qira'at coming out from them. So we'll talk about that as well. Sham, you have Al-Mughirah ibn Shahab al-Makhzumi. Al-Mughirah ibn Shahab, he's like the greatest student of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Okay? And Khalid bin Sa'd. Okay.
Sheikh Hammad,
Yes.
another question.
Yes.
I just had a question. When would the four madhabs have taken place?
The four madhabs, these take place. So the first one would be Imam Abu Hanifa, who was born in 70, right? He passed away 150. Okay. To put things in perspective, one of the major qira'at, which is the qira'ah of Khalaf, the qira'ah of Hamza al-Zayyat. Hamza and Abu Hanifa were like best friends. So they were living together. Okay? And then, for example, Imam Malik, he used to love the qira'ah of Nafi', right? So they were both these major imams in qira'ah and the major imams in fiqh. They were both all around the same time, right? A lot of times the fiqh came either the same time, like for example, Hamza radiallahu anh, or rahimahullah, and Imam Abu Hanifa at the same time. But before Imam Abu Hanifa, you had Asim, right? For example, Imam Shafi'i, he was very fond of the qira'ah of Ibn Kathir, which is a major qira'ah, right?
And so, that's what I was asking, like the four different madhabs, they may have chosen different qira'ah.
Each school
might have been different.
Yes, this is, they're two completely separate things. Okay? The fiqh is completely separate. This is sciences of the Quran. Okay? But you will see the sciences of Quran affecting the fiqh. Okay? Not the other way around. The madhabs did not affect the qira'at. Right? But you will see the sciences of the qira'ah affecting the madhabs. Yes. So the Quran always comes first. Okay? Okay. So now. So let's start talking about riwayat. So now the Sahaba are everywhere around, and like I just mentioned many lists, obviously we don't have to know them all, but we kind of see that the tabi'een, major qurra, like scholars of Quran of the tabi'een, are also in all these major cities. Okay, so now this is where the riwayat come, right? So remember, we have to remember Sahaba and tabi'een, because again, everything goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. Let's do Kufa, since we all are familiar with Hafs. Okay? So what we study nowadays a lot is Hafs. So Imam Hafs. I'll write Hafs over here. Imam Hafs learned from the major Imam. Okay, this is the riwayah of Hafs from the Imam Asim. Asim is we say the qira'ah of Asim. Okay, so now Asim. Asim's major teacher was Abdul Rahman as-Sulami. All of this is taking place in Kufa. Okay, this is Kufa. So Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami. Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami was the Qari appointed by Uthman radiallahu anh to teach the people Quran. So he came with the Mus'haf and he was appointed as the chief Qari. Right? So whenever you want to learn Quran or you want to be validated, like I approve of this person, we call this ijaza. You would go to Imam Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami. Okay? Imam Asim also learned from Zir ibn Hubaysh. Zir ibn Hubaysh, famous scholar. You'll find his ahadith in the big books, even like Riyadh al-Salihin and stuff like that too. So Zir ibn Hubaysh, and then you also have I'm going to put Sa'd bin Ilyas. He was famously known as Abu Amr al-Ilyas al-Shaybani. Right. So Imam Asim, remember, he had many teachers. I'm listing 3 major ones. Okay? Now, how does it work? So now, Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami, who did he learn Quran from? Abdullah bin Mas'ud, and I'm going to put this symbol right here, Radat radiyallahu an, right? Short for radiyallahu an. So you know which one is a Sahabi. Okay? So Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu an, he was actually the teacher of all 3 of them. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, just so you know, he is one of the greatest Sahaba, according to one hadith, the greatest Sahaba when it comes to knowledge of the Quran. Okay? That comes in the hadith book by Tahawi. Okay, so Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anh, he's the teacher of all 3. When Umar radiallahu anh was the Khalifa, this Kufa was conquered. And it was kind of rebuilt by Umar radiallahu anh. And it's such a prime location that many of the Sahaba moved there. And Kufa became this hub of knowledge, right? Now, because many Muslims are living in Kufa, and it's such a strategic point as well, Umar radiallahu anh sends his best Sahabi, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, to go to Kufa and teach them Quran, and teach them fiqh, and teach them, Islam. So he is the chief faqih when it comes to fiqh matters, You go to Abdullah bin Mas'ud, and when it comes to Quran, he is the one teaching everybody Quran. Now, he remains like the main person. So when you study like the qira'at history, you will learn that like you will have people talking about how at a certain point of time, everybody in Kufa used to read the qira'ah of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. So the way he taught the Quran, that he learned from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of Kufa used to read this. Okay. Now, you also have, I'll put Uthman radiallahu anhu. Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu.
Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Naam. Putting it right here. Ali ibn Abi Talib. Right, Ali ibn Abi Talib. How does he get here? Remember, Ali radiallahu anhu, he also, when he is the Khalifa, his base for Khilafah is not Medina. He moves it to Kufa. Right? So Ali radiallahu anhu, he is also living in Kufa. So he is going to be the teacher of many Qurra as well. Since Ali radiallahu anhu, he is a major Sahabi and the Khalifa and a scholar of Quran. Right?
So I have Ubay ibn Ka'b.
Yes, that's the last one.
I'm trying to grab these names for my ijaza here. I have this series, Hafs an Asim for my ijaza and my certificate. I have Hafs an Asim and Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, and all these Sahaba, and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
MashaAllah.
and Jibreel alayhi salam.
Yes.
From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So you have Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami. Again, he was chosen by Uthman radiallahu anhu for a reason. He had learned Quran from Ubay ibn Ka'b. Ubay ibn Ka'b is also one of the four. There's many sciences. So one of the major Sahaba for the knowledge of Quran was actually Ubay ibn Ka'b. He also learned from Ali ibn Abi Talib. He also learned from Abdullah bin Mas'ud. He also learned from Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu. He also learned from. No, he did not learn from Zayd bin Thabit. No, so we'll talk about it a little bit more later on about how it kind of. So Zayd bin Hubaysh radiallahu anhu, he was one of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu's most famous students, right? And then he also learned from Uthman radiallahu anhu, right? And Sa'd bin Ilyas al-Shaybani, he learned from Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, right? So now, Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, he is the kind of hujjah, we call it hujjah. He is the final verdict when it comes to, am I reading the Quran correctly? Let me go ask Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami. Now, Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami is learning from all of these different Sahaba. Okay? When deeper knowledge, you also learn, like for example, how his qira'ah kind of was. It was mainly Ali ibn Abi Talib, but then you also have touches from Abdullah bin Mas'ud's qira'ah from, and he would recite according to the lugha of Hudayl. Anyways, kind of deeper stuff. So now Asim radiallahu anh, he is a major student of Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, who bases his qira'ah mainly on Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? And then Asim radiallahu anh also learns from Zayd ibn Hubaysh, who based his qira'ah mainly on Abdullah bin Mas'ud. And then he also learned from Sa'd bin Ilyas al-Shaybani. And he also had many other teachers. Right? When Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami passes away, the next chief qari of Kufa is going to be Imam Asim. Right? So now from Imam Asim, everybody is learning Quran, right? It comes until Imam Asim was appointed. Everybody kind of stuck to Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. There was also political reasons behind this. Anyways. So Kufa is generally reading in this qira'ah. But this qira'ah, it doesn't live long. Right? When Imam Asim becomes the Imam. Now Imam Asim, subhanAllah, when you read the narrations, you learn how he had this really beautiful voice and he had just such amazing knowledge of Quran. That Imam Asim, when he was the chief of Kufa, the chief qari of Kufa. Everybody started adopting the qira'ah of Asim. Everybody was learning from Asim, everybody's narrating from Asim. The Imam Asim reads the Quran like this. I learned from Imam Asim and he taught me this, right? And everybody is copying Imam Asim. He had a beautiful voice as well. Okay, so Imam Asim's qira'ah becomes the predominant qira'ah in Kufa. Now from Imam Asim, you have Hafs. Now Imam Hafs was, you could say, Imam Asim's greatest student. Alright? Why? He was also his stepson. Right? So he is living with Imam Asim. Right? And day and night, he is continuously, with Imam Hafs. With Imam Asim. Right? So this is the riwayah. This is what a riwayah is. Right? So Imam Asim, his qira'ah, we can see this is only a snapshot of the full web that connects back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Remember, at the top we always have Rasulullah, and I'm going to put this sign right here. It's Shufra sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the qira'ah, right, is being passed down from person to person, right? We call this jammun ghafir. It's many people are taking from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, passing it down to men. You can't count on your fingers how many people the Quran is being passed down from. This is why we call the Quran mutawatir. Right? You can't fathom that it has a mistake. You can't fathom that it's wrong. It's made up. How can you make it up? Impossible. Right? So this is the riwayah. Okay? So in Kufa, this Imam Asim became the main qari, and everybody in Kufa is reading the qira'ah of Imam Asim. Right? And Imam Hafs narrates according to Imam Asim. Imam Hafs, for example, he travels to Baghdad and he travels to Mecca, and then so you see his qira'ah kind of spreading around, right? And so many people are his students, and they all are narrating from Imam Hafs, right? Narrating is the translation of riwayah. So when we say riwayah, we say it's a narration of the Quran of Imam Hafs, who's narrating from Imam Asim until it goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? We can see Sheikh over here is connected. You can see his teacher, all the way till it goes to Imam Hafs, and then he said it goes from this. Right? He doesn't mention Zid ibn Khubayb, yes? Yes, through Abu Rahman al-Sulami. And remember, like I mentioned, Imam Asim mainly based his qira'ah on Abu Rahman al-Sulami. So it makes more sense. Okay, so this is the narration of Quran, right? Any questions? Right.
We have Shu'ba, I guess, also.
Where's Shu'ba right here? Imam Asim's other student was Shu'ba. Okay, now so you will see the qira'at. So now where did the qira'at? So now we've heard of Hafs and we've heard of Asim. So when we say the term, you put it in red so we don't get confused. القراءات العشر المتواترة. When we hear this term, the 10 mutawatir qira'at. Remember, I wrote it up here, mutawatir. What does mutawatir mean? It's just unfathomable that it could be wrong, because it's just so many people, right? This is we're no longer talking da'if, sahih, thiqa, saduq. It's just so many people. You're like, yeah, 100%, right? You don't even have to think about it. So from the al-qira'at al-ashr al-mutawatira, one of them is Asim. Okay? You will see later down the line so basically what happened historically, right? When you study qira'at, you will see Imam Asim's qira'ah it was the major qira'ah in Kufa until a certain somebody came about. Right? When a certain somebody came, the qira'ah of Asim became shadowed by another qira'ah that just became very, very, very popular. Right? And that was, remember, after one qari dies, another person is appointed as the chief qari. So the chief qari who kind of shadowed over in Kufa was Imam Hamza al-Zayyat, they say. Hamza al-Zayyat. So now, Hamza al-Zayyat, right? You will see his qira'ah. It's also through all the teachers in Kufa, right? And then you'll see him go through Alqama and Aswad and all these similar line from here, and then it'll go back to these people over here. So then you also get Imam Hamza, and then Imam Hamza's qira'ah became the popular qira'ah in Kufa, and it actually stayed the popular qira'ah in Kufa for a very long time. Okay, so just to give you a perspective, I don't think we need to make another one of these webs, right? So I'm going to just kind of instead
Just another quick question.
Yes.
Why we have a different riwayah between Shu'bah and Hafs, and both are from Asim, from the same source?
So remember, these are riwayat, narrations.
Yeah.
So Imam Asim, he learned from all these teachers. Do you think all of his teachers read the same way? No. Right? Again, remember what we talked about, sab'at ahruf. So the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, when they are learning from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of them heard a different way of reciting a certain part of the Quran, or they had a different dialect that they were taught to use. Okay? So the Sahaba, now they teach the Tabi'in. And the Tabi'in, remember, nothing can be recited from your own brain. It has to be heard from a sanad, a connection to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So now, these Tabi'in are learning from the Sahaba, and they all learn different things. Right? Many of them similar, many of them slight differences. So now when it comes to Imam Asim, he learning from Zir bin Hubayy, Sa'd bin Abi Iyas, Ash-Shaybani, and you also have Abu Abdurrahman as-Sulami. Now he's taking from these teachers which one he is comfortable with. Okay, remember, the purpose of the sab'at ahruf was what? We said this word tarkhis, to make it easy for you. For example, if I find it easier in my Surah Fatiha to say si with the sin, sirata, right? So maybe that qari would have preferred that way of recitation. Or for example, a za or a sad, whatever it may be, right? So Imam Asim is not necessary that he is teaching all of his students the exact same way, yeah? So he's teaching, and then he's telling them, oh, there's also this way of reciting, right? I was thinking of the thing in Surah Kahf. It's not coming to me. But it's a place where Imam Shu'bah has like a famous ikhtilaf. Anyways, so we have Imam Hamza, Imam Asim, and just like that, every single one of these qaris will have a rawi, we're gonna call it. So now we have kind of like a similar. I can make the web, but obviously, if you want further information, we can always, learn from each other. So for example, you have Nafi'. Imam Nafi' was the famous qari in Medina. right? And remember I mentioned Imam Malik, right? When the brother asked a very good question. So Imam Nafi', he was the king of Medina, basically. All the Quran, he is like the major teacher, right? So Imam Nafi', right? And again, like from all of these, you're gonna have narrations. For example, you have Qalun, and then you have Warsh, right? So for example, Imam Qalun, he's living in Medina and he's learning from Nafi'. Warsh did not live in Medina. Warsh lived in Egypt. He's living in Egypt. He travels down to Medina. He spends some time with Imam Nafi', and he does like 4 khatmat. He recites, he learns the whole Quran 4 times. And then he goes back to Egypt and he becomes the main qari in Egypt, right? And then you have, for example, Ibn Kathir. And you have Abu Amr. You have Imam Kasai. Ibn Amr, right? And then you have
Abu Ja'far.
Abu Ja'far, Yaqub, and then you have Khalaf, right? Especially at the ending. Right, so now what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to write, so Imam Asim was, for example, in where? Kufa. Imam Hamza was where? Kufa, right?
As well, yeah.
Right? Imam Nafi' was where?
Medina.
Medina. Ibn Kathir was in Mecca, right? And he's gonna be he was the only one really in Mecca, okay? But then you're also going to see, for example, Imam Hafs travels down to Mecca, and Imam Hafs's qira'ah actually becomes quite popular in Mecca. Abu Amr was in Basra, right? Kisai was also in Kufa, right? Basically, what happened here, we talk about, it was Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, and then it came Ibn Mas'ud, and then Abdurrahman al-Sulami, and then Asim became the main person, and then at some point became Hamza. After Hamza, it had become Kisai, right? And then Kisai's qira'ah was actually kind of like half and half with Imam Hamza and Kufa. So both qira'ahs were very popular. Ibn Amr was in, I'm going to put Damascus. We say Ibn Amr al-Shami. We call this Sham, the Levant. Right? So you could say Damascus. You can also say Sham. Abu Ja'far was also in Medina. After Nafi', Abu Ja'far, right? Yaqub was basically after Abu Amr al-Basri. His qira'ah was very, very popular. And then you're going to get the qira'ah of Yaqub becomes very popular. And then Khalaf is, I was just going to write Kufa. And Kufa was like a major hub of knowledge, right? And now from each of these, so these are the main imams. Now, basically, these imams had so many students. Okay, this is important. They had so many students. Not all of these students are the brightest kids, right? The brightest students. So you're gonna have some people who don't necessarily narrate, they didn't understand completely correct, right? So from these, there were certain students who just shone, and so many people learn from these students, right? So these become the popular people. So over here we have Hafs and Shu'bah, right? Actually in Kufa, it was Shu'bah, his qira'ah was the one that kind of was spread in Kufa. Hafs' qira'ah didn't actually spread really in Kufa. Because, he didn't spend much time in Kufa, to be honest. Qalun and Warsh, right? Ibn Kathir, you have Bazi, and you have Qunbul, yes. Abu Amr, you have Duri and Susi, right? And, each person has two famous ruwat, right? Narrators, students, right? So this is kind of how there's many other students, right? But when time is going on, the scholars wanted to emphasize that which is 100% authentic. That we have no doubt that yes, this is narrated to us correctly. Like when you study the qira'at, you will see that these students, Hafs, Shu'ba, Qalun, Warsh, Bazi, Qumbul, right? They have 50, 60 different turuq coming from them. So I can bring you a sanad that goes to Imam Hafs, a different one, like 20, 30, 40, 50 times. So many different. This is what we call mutawatir. This is what we call mutawatir, right? So two of these, like when you add them up, you're going to see, for example, like 126 different turuq coming from this one. And then, all of them, such a high number, 111. Okay? And, these students, they keep going, right? Now, these riwayat, okay? Today, which one do we find is most popular? It would be Hafs, right? Right. Now, I'm thinking. So, we talked about this a little bit. Like, for example, in Kufa, the major qira'ah was Asim, right? And it was actually the riwayat of Shu'ba, right? Imam Hafs's qira'ah was quite popular in Mecca, okay? From Nafi', I think I could just do something like, okay, so this is a very crude map. Okay, well, I'll label it since it's so crude. We have Spain, we have Mecca, Medina, we have Misr, right? We're gonna call this Maghrib. Maghrib means West Africa, right? And then you have over here, you have Damashq, or you could say Sham, right? And then over here we're gonna have Kufa and Basra. So, very crude map, right? India needs to be put on there because I'm Indian. So over here in Kufa, we had Asim's qira'ah quite popular, right? And then it became Hamza. And then it became Kisai, right? So we talked about this. In Mecca we had Ibn Kathir. His qira'ah was quite popular, Bazi and Qumbul, right? Now, remember what I talked about? Medina we had Nafi'. Nafi''s qira'ah is very popular, right? So we have Nafi', right? And then after Nafi' we get the qira'ah of Abu Ja'far. So these qira'at were very, very popular during certain eras. Okay? In Misr, right, we had the riwayah of Warsh. I'll say Warsh an Nafi' because it's in reality Nafi''s qira'ah, but it's Warsh his narration. Okay? Because remember I told you, he came to Medina and then he goes back to Misr. Okay? And then over here also the riwayat of Warsh. Right? Spain, we had the riwayat of Warsh. And then over here, we have the riwayat of Abu Amr. Okay. So, you will see if you study, like, if we study further, I'm going to actually stop here, and then I just want to explain one last point. You will see at a certain point, it wasn't Hafs that was the most popular. There was a large period of time where all of this was Abu Amr. Abu Amr's qira'ah was super popular, right? there was, so many centuries, the Imam Warsh, his qira'ah was popular, right? Even nowadays, you'll find a lot of people reciting in Warsh, the riwayat of Warsh. You'll find a lot of people. One of my classmates was from Sudan. He brought with him a mushaf of Duri, right? This one right here. He was comfortable with Duri, not Hafs. Okay, so the last point I want to mention is now something about the qira'at. So I talked about this before. So making it make sense. So how would the different dialects really help you? So we're just going to use a simple example of Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, right? Because some people, they bring this up specifically, sirata, right? If you actually knew, sirata is not the original form of the word. Sirata comes from sirata, right? What does sirata mean?
Straight.
Right, path, right? The straight path, right? The path, right? And you can understand that it's definitely the original, because if you ever studied Arabic, you will see like sin and ra, when they come together, it's always something about traveling. Like sara, right? Sara means to travel. Safara, right? Sira, right? You can usually go sarrada yusarridu, right? All of these means have something to do with moving, putting in a certain direction. So it's definitely, this is the original. So linguistics, we call this assimilation, where you have when we speak, this is all comes under something called phonology. When we speak, we don't always conform to the exact letters of a word. Things often change when we're speaking. All right, I'll give you a lot of examples. For example, if I said, first I'll start with this. How do I say this word right here? Have, right? Have. If I put it in a sentence though, how do I say it? I have to go. Nobody has ever said that. We say, I have to go. I have to. Okay? So it changes to have. Why? It's very similar to here. Okay? What happened over here is we have the letter V has a quality in it which we call voice. Right? Maybe you can argue in Arabic this could be equal to Jah. Maybe. This is my opinion. Okay? Now, what happened is the T over here is this have a voice. Basically what voice means is my glottis vibrates when I say this letter. Okay? So, now, you can see the glottis vibrating, vocal cords. If I stopped vibrating my vocal cords, what letter do I get?
Fa.
Fa. Right? So we say this, no voice for F, voice for V, right? I would argue this is humps, right? So T has no voice, and V and F are very, very similar. The only difference is, am I vibrating my glottis or not? So when the V comes next to the T kind of bullies the V into also becoming unvoiced. And so instead of saying I have to, you say I have to. This is called assimilation, right? Again, phonology. When we speak, a lot of these things happen. So over here, what's happening? I have sirata. Now, sin has this quality of, we call istifal. Istifal means it's thin, right? Ra has this quality of isti'ala, of tafkhim, it's thick, right? So I will say thin, and I will say thick, right? Now, what happens is the Ra bullies the sin into being more compliant with the Ra, right? So instead of saying si, rata, I will change the sin to a thick version of sin, which is sad, right? So instead of sirata, I say slirata. And this is how we all read it. This is not even the original way, but this is one of the 7 dialects, right? Now the question comes. Some qira'at, they say, Ihdina al-zirata al-mustaqim. Right? We don't say sirata, we don't say sirata, we say zirata. Right? We call this ishmam. What does ishmam mean? Give it a little sniff. I think it means that. So, Sad. We've changed it to Sad. But now, you can argue that Ra and Sad still have some things that are not similar, which is voice. Again, back to the same thing. Voice and unvoice. Your glottis vibrates. We call this voice. Jahr. The Sad, my glottis does not vibrate. Now, the same thing that happened here, have to, same thing happens here, except it's just backwards now. So now when I do the same thing, Sad, but now I vibrate my vocal cord, I get Zad. Right? So you see the Ra kind of bullied the Sad into a Jahr. And that's how you got the So you did like Ishmam. You gave it a sniff of the Ra. Okay? And just like that, this is just one example. The qira'at, you can understand how the qira'at kind of go back to the dialects. Okay? So we'll stop here. I might have went over time. I don't know.
Yes.
Yes.
But I did want to ask a question.
Okay.
So you were explaining here, right? Like, can you show one word with like 7 examples of how you pronounce them?
Okay.
Like here.
Yes.
You got 3 right now, right?
Yeah. So I will explain to you this. When I say 7 dialects, it does not necessitate 7 dialects does not necessitate 7 ways. Right? For example, let's say I have 3 tribes. I'm going to say tribe A, tribe B, and tribe C. Just to make this quick. Tribe A, they say alayhim. They also say alayhum. Tribe B say alayhim, and they say alayhimu as well. Tribe C, they say alayhum, they say alayhumu as well. Right? And you can add on to this as well. Right? They all, for example, alayhim, and I said alayhum, alayhimu, alayhum, alayhumu. Okay? So, from these different dialects, if I just brought you this one and this one, I've encompassed all 3. You see? So with 2 variations, I have catered to 3 different dialects. Right? Now, on the flip also works, which is I can also have 7 dialects which have each one having 3-4 different ways of saying something, and I can end up with 28 different ways. Right? Which is why in certain words of the Quran you will find narrations. For example, uf. How many different ways does uf come? Like 35. Right? Because the 7 different dialects, each way, just for example, how I can tell you in English, I can say alcohol or liquor. They're both synonyms. But both words are used in my dialect. Right? There may be a certain dialect, they're like, what's liquor? Right? There's another dialect says, what's alcohol? Right? But I can have 5-6 different ways of saying the same thing. Right? Just like that, the other dialect may have 5-6 other ways of saying the same thing. Right? And just like that, I can end up with more than 7. Right? Sometimes just one way is going to suffice. Right? You may have places, for example, another famous one is Maliki Maliki. Maliki Yawmiddin, right? Owner of the Day of Judgment. Some dialects may not use the word Malik to mean owner. They may use the word Sahib, right? But there's another dialect that is Malik, right? And then you can keep going, but we're gonna stop here. Like I said, we can't obviously study encompass everything to do with qira'at in such a short time. Yes.
Can we say that each qira'ah is a sort of combination between the 7 ahruf?
From these qira'at,
Each qira'ah, yeah. Can I say that?
yes, these qira'at
It's
have
com-
nothing to do with that hadith itself.
Yeah.
What that hadith itself explains to us is that there were different phonological variations in the Quran to cater to the different Sahaba, right? And these 10 qurra, these imams, they learned from all these different tabi'een, right? Some of them were tabi'een, they learned from Sahaba. And they came and they had a narration of the Quran that was coming from all of these Sahaba, right? So it's not necessary that I read only according to the dialect of Hudayl, for example. That's not what the hadith means, right? Remember, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ. Take from whatever you want that makes it easy for you to read the Quran. Right? Just stop here.
Yes.
Right.
Very good, mashallah.
I'm not good with timing. They told me an hour and a half though, so
Yeah.
you can blame management.
Yeah. Yeah, but
In that sense, I went under time.
you want an ending for this? No? Okay, جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.